So welcome to all of you. We are really pleased to welcome you today for this session organized by DEMAC, the Diaspora Emergency Action and Coordination Global Initiative. This session is recorded for your information, so the video will be then posted on our social media page. We really hope for your active participation today, so please share your question in the Q&A section. If you also would like to share your organization and title, we'll be also very pleased to hear that, so that we can also contribute in a better way to our discussion. And at the end, you will also have a little bit of time if you would like to raise your hand and speak directly to us. It will be also possible, so feel free to do so. And that said, let's begin. Since the start of the conflict, we've seen that Ukrainian Diaspora Organizations have been at the forefront of the humanitarian response in Ukraine and were among the first responders. They were able to mobilize resources at a pace and at a scale that was rarely seen before. Their local knowledge and connection in Ukraine provided them with a unique ability to access and to provide humanitarian assistance in all regions and areas affected by the conflict. DO were very well prepared. A lot of them had anticipated this crisis and were therefore critical in the first weeks of the conflict to provide this humanitarian assistance, and their impact has been very impressive. On the other hand, we saw that maybe more traditional actors were maybe a little bit less prepared and took quite a bit of time to reorganize themselves and respond to the needs. We also saw something which is quite unique or new, is that a lot of institutional humanitarian actors were very interested in learning and engaging directly with Ukrainian Diaspora Organization, which is something that we are really interested to see. So this unique Ukrainian case might change and shape the way institutional humanitarian actors engage with Diaspora Organization in the future. Diaspora Humanitarianism, why the Ukraine crisis changes everything. This is the title of our session today, and we have 5 amazing panelists who will speak about this topic. The first one is Emily Savage. She is a researcher and co-founder of Meraki Labs. Maybe we can feature her. She, over the last months, led a research and a real-time review on Ukrainian Diaspora Organization providing humanitarian assistance in Ukraine. And she's also worked over the past 10 years in various humanitarian settings for large NGOs in the Middle East and in Africa. Our second panelist is Tatiana Stanici. She's the president of Caritas Ukraine, one of the largest national NGO providing humanitarian assistance all over the country. She's worked in Ukraine in the aid sector for more than 25 years now. She has extremely extended experience of the context. Our third speaker is Andriy Kuzmin. He's the chair of BEVER Ukraine. BEVER Ukraine is a Ukrainian diaspora organization based in Denmark and has been one of the most proactive and largest diaspora organization providing assistance also in many regions in Ukraine and working very closely with a lot of stakeholders in the country. And our fourth panelist is Dina Volynets. She is currently the DEMAC Liaison Officer in Ukraine. She has also worked last year on a research piece on Diaspora Organization, on Ukrainian Diaspora Organization humanitarian intervention in Ukraine. And previously, she was also the NGO Forum coordinator in Ukraine in 2014 and 2015. And finally, we have Irina Koval, who is currently transitioning between 2 roles, both very interesting for us. Currently, she's the partnership officer at WHO for the health cluster in Ukraine. And her new role is now as senior partnership officer at the International Rescue Committee, IRC, also in Ukraine. So she has extensive experience with several civil society organizations and partnering with civil society organizations, and also the cluster, obviously. Thank you to all 5 of you to be with us today and to discuss this very interesting topic. My first question is actually to Irina to set the scene and understand a little bit the context of Ukraine. Irina, is Ukraine's current context different from other crises? And if so, why?
Thank you very much, Raphaël. Pleasure to be here. Of course, I haven't worked in all the crises, as you put in your question, but from what I hear a lot, and my personal view is that Ukraine is special in a way that we have a lot of local knowledge and capacity on the ground, which needs to be considered. And I hear a lot of my foreign colleagues saying the same. So we have strong government institutions which have their own coordination capacity and response capacity. We have strong civil society and grassroots initiatives. All of us see the amazing mobilization of Ukrainian society as a whole. Of course, we have private companies who are also actively engaging and participating, and we have diaspora organizations. So I think all of it together makes Ukraine a unique conflict context. And from the perspective of today's discussion, I think it requires all of us to work together effectively and coordinate as much as we can. And of course, from the experience of 2014, those of us who were part of the response focusing on the Eastern conflict area can say that, or have experienced, different stages, and we can learn from that experience as well. When in the beginning, the first stages of the conflict, it was mainly the grassroots initiatives who took the lead, and then slowly we were able to build capacity and bring institutional actors. So I think from this perspective, it's also important to learn from that experience and try to anticipate for the future. Over. Thank you.
Okay, well, no, absolutely, a lot to learn about, and a lot of, as you said, different stakeholders intervening from a private sector, civil society organization, national NGO, and diaspora organization. Emily, my next question is to you. What makes Ukrainian diaspora organization Humanitarian response in Ukraine so unique?
Gotta unmute here. Okay, I think I just want to build up the last response, which is that I think, as opposed to many other crises, the diaspora organizations were already active in Ukraine, and because of that strong civil society kind of approach, I would say, especially building, a lot of organizations were able to take what they were doing in 2014 to the 2022 period, mostly in the east of Ukraine, whether that was providing direct assistance or advocacy or continued fundraising and support, and be more spontaneous and grow their activities very quickly. I think that you mentioned in the introduction the scale of the response and how quickly they were able to kind of leverage the global outpouring of support for the crisis was really unique. And I think that's because they're perceived to have quite a bit of legitimacy. I think because they've been speaking out about the crisis for a long time, and they were early on social media, having protests in the streets in a lot of countries, warning about the crisis. They were the legitimate actors, I think, when the crisis kicked off. And as a result, we're able to kind of have a strong diversity of partnerships already established with local organizations on the ground, with some INGOs and UN actors, as well as partners in local civil society in the host countries where they're located. And that for me really made a difference.
Thank you, Emily. No, that's extremely insightful. And how were Ukrainian diaspora organization able to support Ukrainian indeed in Ukraine? How was the humanitarian assistance channel there? Maybe this is something Andrei could elaborate on, because he's been as a chair of a Ukrainian diaspora organization really involved in this.
Yeah, first of all, in order to do it, we need to be prepared, and I think we were quite prepared, because that was just continue what we have in 2014. So we had an experience with giving such humanitarian response. Also, organization been running for 8 years. 1 month in advance, we take, now even 2 months in advance, we take a session, and creates a group of people who's been thinking, what shall we do tomorrow if the war will start it? And I think this preparation give us really good input on what we've been doing further. The biggest challenge was that I think response in all countries like Denmark from the society, from Danish people was huge. And we were a link who was in between Danish people and Ukrainian people, and trying to receive as much as possible donations and forward it to Ukraine. It was medicine, it was medical equipment, food, hygiene stuff, clothes, and many other things. And the other things that there were also a lot of volunteering groups here in Denmark which arise, and we were able to share our knowledge and experience very quickly to them, so they can operate or start operation very quickly. So it's, I think, both combination of having a lot of volunteers and having knowledge how to react and how to do it in the most efficient way. That allow us in the first 3 weeks to send 50 trucks, and as far as I remember, we were ahead of all Danish local big organization who were sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Of course, I think that was our role, to act very efficiently and act very fast. Then, of course, later on, the bigger players like Red Cross, Refugee Council, other organizations, they took their roles, but we were first to react.
Thank you so much, Andre. No, that's extremely interesting to hear, and it would be also interesting to hear from Dina, because you've been also working with various Ukrainian diaspora organizations, also some based in the US. How was the assistance provided? What are the modalities of intervention?
Thank you, Raphaël. So basically, we can say that there are three main modalities of diaspora organizations supporting Ukraine at the moment. First one is it's obviously advocacy, because they have been doing it from the very beginning, and they were doing it before. They are strong in advocacy. They are very active since 2013. So the advocacy is the first part. It's not only in US, but in all the countries. Ukrainian diaspora work with Ukrainian representatives like the government and the consulates, and also they work with local government. The second one is basically funding frontline responders, because those volunteer groups that were responding in the first days, they were fundraising online through Facebook, and Diaspora was the first one who was funding basically those activities. And the third, as Andre said, was direct assistance, food, NFI, medical items, equipment, etc. It was coming by trucks through Europe, by planes through Poland and Moldova. So like all possible modalities that could exist in humanitarian crisis, as Ukraine were in the beginning and it is now, they were all present.
Thank you, Dina. Now that's extremely interesting, and we see really different approaches and a quite agile approach from diaspora organization, able to provide assistance directly or to work with local authorities or with different partners. So it would be interesting also maybe to hear from the national NGO perspective, Ukrainian national NGO like Caritas Ukraine. Maybe Tetiana, you could tell us more about your how you see the role of diaspora organization, and if you see any difference or value added compared to more traditional actors like the UN agencies or INGOs. It was a long question.
Yeah, thank you, Raphaël. So it's so interesting for me to hear the other panelists discussing the benefit of how they were able to move quickly in the beginning of the war, and it was really the same story that we had with Caritas. So it's interesting. So Caritas is a national NGO. We have centers that are based throughout the country. We've been working also in Eastern Ukraine for 8 years, so we had a good experience already of learning how to provide humanitarian aid in the eastern part of the country, but it was really focused on just a small group of our centers, maybe 5 or 6 centers. And so our challenge was to take that experience and to scale it to the other centers. But in that way, we were really well pre-positioned, I think better than some of the larger NGOs that were based in only Eastern Ukraine. Yeah, so they didn't have that immediate ability to scale up, whereas we did. Yeah, so we had also gone through a process of contingency planning, preparedness before the war started. That was a very serious approach. We worked with 19 of our centers to come up with a plan for each center. What would we do if there was a large-scale invasion and a large number of IDPs? So actually, in the first day, we had no pause. Yeah, we called all our centers together and we started working immediately. So it allowed us, you know, it's this combination of being both national and local. It's this, you know, each of our centers has a slightly different character to it. It's a strong decentralized system, which allowed us to be very nimble in responding to the crisis. And I think that's what allowed us to move so quickly, as quickly as we did. And it continues to allow us to scale, yeah, because we've expanded the number of centers that we're working with from 19 to 31 already. And then under those centers, there's additional centers. So we have 42 shelters that are already working, and then another 42 parishes that are working as distribution points. So it's this ability to be local and to respond locally that I think has made such a big difference.
And how do you engage with Ukrainian Diaspora Organization? I know Caritas is potentially receiving, has some form of partnership or some form of support from various, some from the Ukrainian diaspora abroad. How does it work exactly, and what value do they bring to your organization?
Yeah, there's a huge value. So we had the closest cooperation with Australia, the Ukrainian diaspora in Australia. We already had projects previously with them during the first period of the war from 2014 until now. And so that was very easy to jump in and scale up our cooperation with the Australian diaspora. And we also have a very strong cooperation with the UK diaspora. Also, that was able to just jumpstart and start moving very quickly. And again, I think it's this combination of, you know, having a local presence that's already strong, and then at the same time having this knowledge of how to do things in a way that will be transparent, that will be understandable to our colleagues in the diaspora abroad. I think that's appealing to them. It's a good mix, yeah, because it's not a huge NGO. It's a systematic NGO that has a local presence, yeah, and so it has. I think that has that really strong appeal. I think for diaspora organizations and also for us, yeah, because part of who we are is community. Yeah, it's a community that offers assistance to other people, so it's good. I think it's also good for us to have when we build community, we build it inside of the small community, inside of the country. We have connections between different Caritas within the country. So for example, you know, many of our Caritas in the western part of the country were the ones who were organizing and sending aid into the eastern Caritases. Yeah, and then that can spread also to, again, to diaspora organizations and outside. I think it's a very natural fit.
Great, thank you so much, Dina. That's really it's super interesting to hear, and it would be also interesting to hear how UN agency or NGO perceive the value of diaspora organization, and if they see any kind of value added or complementarity with other actors' work. Maybe Irina, you could say a word about this.
Definitely, no, I perfectly agree that diaspora organizations have a lot of value to bring to the table, and some of it I think has been mentioned, that they're more flexible, they can respond fast. they know the context. They have great knowledge and understanding of the conflicts, of the context before maybe some of the institutional actors come in. Of course, not the ones who have been working before, but for instance, what we saw in the health cluster is that after February 24th, a lot of new actors started coming. If before we had something like 30 organizations, now we are about 160. So there is a lot of interest to Ukraine, but the diaspora organizations are unique in a way that they represent the country. They know the context. They can quickly build the networks and use their networks in Ukraine to respond. From that perspective, I think it's great to engage diaspora organizations, and humanitarian partners could actually have very productive and effective partnerships with diaspora organizations, and even bring some of the new humanitarian partners on board through these connections, through these partnerships. I think that would be it. And of course, what was mentioned already is the preparedness. I think it's very important because the diaspora organizations follow the situation very closely. Many of them have been active and participating and trying to engage even before the crisis happened. So in that way, I think there are many reasons for humanitarian actors to engage with diaspora organizations. But I would also point one specific detail. I think it's about following humanitarian principles. We know that many diaspora organizations, they try to support as volunteers, and they work on multiple areas, including supporting some of the military operations. And this is, I think, when we have to be a little bit careful, and I'm sure other humanitarian actors on the call would understand and would agree that as humanitarian organizations, we have to be very clear and work only with organizations who are aligned with humanitarian principles of neutrality, independence, impartiality, etc. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. So actually, we talk a lot about Ukrainian diaspora organization, about how they've been intervening in Ukraine. But maybe, Emily, you can explain to us a little, because you've been doing this recently, this real-time review. You could tell us more a little bit about them and how are Ukrainian diaspora organizations structured, and where are they based, and who are they exactly? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. I think you're muted.
I'm on mute. It's still 2 years after all of this, and I still. Okay, so I think, I mean, what was difficult about doing this mapping, actually, especially after the conflict had started, I think we initiated it a couple days in, and because of the amount of outpouring of support for the Ukrainian crisis, there were a lot of organizations that kind of popped up, including a lot of informal organizations, a lot of diaspora communities organizing, you know, rapidly and informally for these fundraisers. And so a challenge for us was to kind of separate, okay, what is kind of mass mobilization and what is a diaspora organization in this context? When we applied, you know, principles of kind of existing prior to the crisis, of having some sort of structure or, you know, presence online, or kind of a mandate that kind of went beyond kind of fundraising initially, we identified about 63 organizations globally. And so many of these are in the United States, Canada, Australia, as well as Europe. And many of them have been engaging in some way with the situation in Eastern Ukraine for years. And so whether that's advocacy or whether that was actually providing humanitarian assistance through partners on the ground, or in some cases directly, many of them are completely volunteer run. So we actually see very few organizations that have paid staff. And that's really impressive, especially with the scale up. Many organizations reported taking on, in some cases, going from 10 volunteers up to 300 over the course of a couple of weeks. And the amount of time and effort that people put in is really spectacular, especially considering many of them have other jobs that they're doing. I think at a broader scale, we also see that because the Ukrainian diaspora is so has existed for some time and is well organized. There's several network organizations that that exist. I think prominently the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America it has 70 members of and those are different organizations, some extremely small that were not included in this mapping, as well as the Ukrainian World Congress that unites globally different diaspora organizations. So I would say that's kind of the overview, and maybe I'll just say something on the partnership structure that's a bit unique. As kind of mentioned, most organizations are working through local partners or local volunteer networks in Ukraine. Many are not implementing directly and instead rely on these partnerships. And those partnerships are usually external to diaspora. So they're local organizations or national NGOs or local volunteers, not between diaspora organizations typically.
Very well. And maybe we'd be interested to hear if Andre and Tatiana share the same view on this finding. Andre, is it also your view that most Ukrainian diaspora organizations are working through partner? Because you were saying you are sending containers the first weeks you were sending everyday containers to Ukraine and implementing providing kind of direct assistance, or maybe you can explain a bit the way you work.
Yeah, that's right. So we've been sending trucks to Ukraine from Denmark. First of all, we use our own network. Due to being present in Ukraine for 8 years, we were able to build quite a good network, and that was our trusty partners. And then through them, we access their network, and it allows us to be present at the cities, at the villages, at the regions where we never been before, and also to speed up all the processes. Good that we had a cooperation with the local authorities beforehand. For example, sending medical aid to the hospitals. We continue to do it because we have established a good partnership relationship with them, and we do quick communication based on trust in order to do it very fast and very, very efficient. Another thing was their company and businesses, which became a big player in receiving and transforming of humanitarian aid to the places where it's needed. It was very useful because they could use their own resources to, for example, when we couldn't send at the beginning of the war humanitarian aid to Kyiv, to Kharkiv, local companies in Lviv, for example, they took this initiative and they are volunteers to send it to this region. So we need to send only to the West Ukraine, and then it was distributed through the partners. Also, a lot of cooperation with the unofficial volunteer groups, which pop up rapidly and been performing very well. And I think based on this cooperation, I think we will have a very good partnership in the future, or maybe even considering opening direct representative of BVA Ukraine in Ukraine. And the last and not the least, what I would mention, that's a great job which we've been doing with DEMAC for last year, cooperating with the other diaspora organizations. We had very close cooperation and communication with the Polish diaspora, with the Czech diaspora, Swedish or German diaspora. And I think it's also allow us to share the knowledge, share the situation, because we were outside of the country. Many of the loads which we sent to Ukraine at the first weeks, it couldn't get into Ukraine because there was a big queues. So we were not able to send it directly to Ukraine. We sent it to the local hubs, and then local diaspora also help us with the coordination and to make this more efficient and speed up all the processes.
So really a broad range of partnership with a more formal NGO, volunteer group, private companies, you've been very agile and flexible depending on.
Yeah, we use all channels which were available. That's true.
No, super interesting. And Tatiana, what's your perspective a little bit on this from the receiving end, from a national NGO perspective? The support being provided by Diaspora Organization, or the type of partnership you have, how does it work on your side? You touched upon it a little bit.
Yes, I would characterize the cooperation with Diaspora in two ways. So one would be a more formal type of cooperation like we have with the Australia or the UK communities. That's one way. And then the other one was this spontaneous explosion of assistance flowing in kind assistance that was flowing in from smaller, they were, I think, more informal diaspora organizations gathering, something maybe parish-based, something church-based. And I have to say that made a huge difference in our ability to respond to the crisis. Yeah, so in the beginning, when it was difficult maybe to get the procurement done in Ukraine, these small initiatives of putting a little microbus together of supplies and sending it into the country was really, I think, life-saving. It allowed us to provide assistance not only in the western part of the country, but that was a big part of what we were sending out east. And we would send it also in different ways. So we were using the train system, we were using trucks, the little mini buses. It was all, you know, it was the variety and the agility of being able to pass the needed materials on, yeah, so that our centers could be doing the work that they were doing. It was really amazing, and I think, and what I want to focus on in my comment is that there were pre-existing relationships, yeah, that maybe hadn't been activated, yeah, but they were already somehow, there was already some kind of relationship that was set up so that when the crisis came, they were able to ramp up quickly and really make a difference. And again, it was a huge support that came in, and it didn't come in centrally. This is another piece. So this pre-existing relationships, but they were also, again, we're not a super hierarchical organization. We're decentralized, and so it really gave our centers a lot of agency to be able to receive, pass on, and they themselves took on a huge part of the ability of the whole organization to respond, yeah, by their own initiative responding. So
no, it's so interesting, and so we really see that this very strong partnership and link and pre-existing also kind of connection between the Ukrainian national NGO like Caritas and the broader Ukrainian diaspora, and it brings so much value in time of crisis. But actually that expands to maybe also another question regarding the broader humanitarian ecosystem. Are Ukrainian diaspora organizations only engaging with national Ukrainian NGO, or are they also linking, coordinating, collaborating with the cluster system or the broader humanitarian ecosystem in general? I don't know if Irina, you who have been working with the cluster, what's your perspective on that?
Yes, thank you very much. I definitely wanted to bring the perspective of cluster, and it's great to hear from Andrei and Tatiana how they managed to respond and partner effectively. But there is also a layer of the cluster, and I think as we continue working and scaling up operations and moving through different stages of the conflict, it's also important to make sure that we coordinate and we avoid duplication of the response, for instance. And this is where cluster steps in. And for instance, as health cluster, we managed to actually scale up quite effectively, and we also partner. We have something like 160 partners. Also, some of the diaspora organizations are able to benefit from this system, and we have several great examples. One of them, AICM, unfortunately not present on the call, but for instance, there were several requests from health facilities that were channeled through the health cluster, and we were able to utilize existing humanitarian partners to respond to these requests and close them effectively. There were some interesting cases, for instance, that we solved with Dina when there was a request coming from Ukrzaliznytsia, right? And we were able to channel them to both diaspora organizations and existing humanitarian partners and see who can respond faster. So as cluster, we put a lot of this effort to coordinate. We also set up in health, for instance, we set up something like eight groups, thematic groups. So we also try to decentralize this cluster. We also set up regional centers. So for instance, partners in Dnipro can coordinate in Dnipro. Partners in Volynets or eastern part can also decentralize the cluster, the coordination a bit. So of course, we keep improving as we speak. And there will be more and more of this effort to coordinate, but it's important to remember and try to collaborate, because just to give you an example, Vivar Ukraine, right? You spoke about being able to mobilize resources quickly or fundraise quickly. I would also consider, for instance, spending some effort, for instance, trying to see if there are any humanitarian partners which could potentially provide in-kind assistance. So maybe you don't have to spend so much resources on mobilizing additional funds, but there is an existing humanitarian partner in a specific location which could step in and provide the resources. Just as an additional option, I think it might be useful to consider clusters. Or in terms of logistical challenges, you might know that, for instance, there is a logistical cluster. Of course, they took some time to build up and figure out different ways to manage the logistical pathways. I'm not an expert in logistics, but of course, this is an additional resource that could be used if needed at a given point of time.
So there is some form of collaboration and coordination. Some Ukrainian diaspora organizations are participating in the cluster, or some form of the cluster is able to channel some needs potentially to some Ukrainian diaspora organization. But there is a lot of room for growing and continue the collaboration a bit further. So that's super great to hear. I see that Tatiana you have your hand up, so maybe you want to complement on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Irina talked about, and really to affirm this approach to moving towards cooperation. Yeah, but I think it's important also to remember that initially the reason why there could be such a robust response in the beginning was that there was a lot of activity, and all that activity found its mark. Yeah, and it was valuable at that time. And I think, Irina, you had mentioned that there's periods of how both the crisis and the humanitarian response is changing. Yeah, you see it changing every week, and I think we are moving towards a more coordinated way of being. And I think that participation in the cluster, I do know that there are I know people from Canada, from the United States that are actively participating, from Europe, who are actively participating in the cluster meetings. And I think they're finding it very interesting. It's a great resource. At Caritas, we've been participants, obviously, in the cluster system since 2014. And I know that we also found that to be really useful, especially once you take it to the local level. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because then you have really substantive discussions, and it's also a capacity building opportunity for the local level as well. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
No, great. That's some great points. And I think since COVID, the fact that a lot of the cluster meetings are now hybrid and also online make it also a little bit more inclusive, and some people can also join remotely, because a lot of diaspora organizations are based outside of the country, obviously. And this, as you said, this local level coordination is also something where diaspora organization maybe fits a bit better, because of they're usually linked to a specific area and have very strong tie there. So it's also something to explore. Maybe we can touch upon a little bit again later in our discussion. I'm moving to my actually next question on the engagement with local authority and the government. Are Ukrainian diaspora organization coordinating with the government in any way? Maybe Andriy and Dina, you can tell us a little bit about this, or your experience on that. Yes, Dina first.
Yeah, so I think diaspora organizations are actually like great example of cooperation on all levels, because first they start from cooperation with the government in the countries of residence, and I think Andriy could tell a little bit more about that. But also what is important is that it's not only humanitarian response being provided through the government in the countries of residence, but also like the spots established, like there's Ukrainian house in Warsaw in Poland, Ukrainian house in London in UK, for example, and they're closely cooperating with diaspora organizations. The Prime Minister of Great Britain recently visited the Ukrainian house in London, so they are very active on that. But also on the local side, Ukraine is a very decentralized country in its nature, both like by the spirit and by the administration, and the diaspora organizations were the one who actually cooperated with local governments in the field. And this actually was kind of a life hack, because local mayors know best what's needed in those locations that were occupied, for example, or where newly like liberated, and a great example, for example, like Bucha, Hostomel, and an Irpin area, where the mayor, for example, is being on the call with diaspora organization from Lithuania, Estonia, and all the other countries. So they know best, and it's actually kind of a life hack from diaspora organizations. Maybe Andriy would add.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Dina. That's what we got. What we got. It's a lot of requests from local authorities contacting us directly to Denmark, asking for humanitarian support from major one as a regional authorities or oblast, or coming to the cities authorities as well. I think good support from our side here in Denmark. We got from Ukrainian embassy in Denmark. They were like daily coordination partner at the beginning, because a lot of humanitarian response from Denmark, which were coming to Ukraine, were going directly. Or if the companies, for example, or businesses or individuals couldn't do it directly from Denmark to Ukraine, it went through us as a humanitarian organization, which sent humanitarian aid to Ukraine. So basically, if their company don't have the whole truck to send to Ukraine, but has only half of the truck, they've been sending to us, and then we've been cooperating, putting a half truck from humanitarian organization, half truck from the business, put it together, send it to Ukraine. Also, another player was our Danish embassy in Ukraine. That also was helpful. I think it went through Ukrainian embassy in Denmark. We had a cooperation, and also we were also referred to Polish embassy or Ukrainian embassy in Poland. Was also very helpful, because a lot of things which were going from Denmark to Ukraine were going through Poland, and a lot of things which were happening over there, like local governmental hubs which were opened in Poland were ruled or operated by local embassy. So there was like a lot of interaction and communication in between, and we get very good support from government and governmental organizations.
And that's maybe another unique situation, or very specific situation of Ukraine, when we see really a very strong involvement of local authorities, embassies, extremely proactive and linking super well with Ukrainian diaspora and Ukrainian diaspora organization all around the world. And this collaboration and coordination seems to have been very effective and efficient. As you say, you were adjusting the needs and the material you were sending on a daily basis based on the feedback you received from different embassies. Super interesting case.
Exactly. I think it's also to add up the information about the needs from Ukraine. It was coming from embassies. They were the like focal point where we got all the list of medicine or other stuff which is urgently needed in Ukraine.
Yeah. No, great to hear. And also the the local authorities, the coordination with local authorities is also is kind of linking to Tetiana's point on also local coordination, and can interesting case maybe that the humanitarian ecosystem can learn from as well. My next point, Dina, is on your role in Ukraine. Would be interested to hear a little bit more. What is this role of DEMAC liaison officer, and what is DEMAC doing exactly in Ukraine?
Thank you. Well, actually, what was surprising for me is that DEMAC actually reached out to me like in the very first day of the war, and proposed to work together and closely to support diaspora organizations, because diaspora organizations were like the first responders, and it was very important to help them coordinate and integrate them into the bigger humanitarian system. So what we are doing in Ukraine now is, first, we provide a space and a platform for diaspora organizations to cooperate with each other. We have these regular weekly meetings where diaspora organizations provide updates and discuss what are the challenges at the moment and what are the needs. We also invite local NGOs and institutional actors to these meetings, just to see how local organizations, institutional actors, and diaspora organizations could collaborate. So the first is basically coordination between each other, but the second one is also engaging them more with local context, with local organizations, local volunteers, and local humanitarian organizations, because diaspora organizations has a huge network of volunteers in Ukraine, but as Irina said in the beginning, Ukraine is quite unique because there are already established humanitarian actors who exist since 2014. So there are NGOs that already have capacity in humanitarian response, and they know the context. So we try to match diaspora organizations with those organizations who work within humanitarian principles. And also we're trying to raise awareness about diaspora organizations within the humanitarian system, and have the on-the-go learning among diaspora organizations about humanitarian principles and about humanitarian system in general. Let's say raise their capacity, but not like in a training mode, but like on-the-go learning. So we kind of becoming a link between those field organizations and humanitarian system, and try to make humanitarian response in Ukraine like more coordinated and effective.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you, Dina. And do you see an interest from institutional humanitarian actors to engage with diaspora organization, or is it both ways? Is there this willingness?
For sure. Many institutional actors, like those who had no experience working with diaspora, they're kind of amazed with the type of support and the scale of support that is coming from diaspora organizations. That's why they're very interested in cooperation. And the local actors, they also see these as the opportunity to get more sustainable let's say response and planned response, because diaspora organizations are very flexible, and you can coordinate and decide on the go about like on the modalities of the cooperation you have, and it's actually very helpful to local organizations.
Very well. Maybe I'll jump into our last question, and then we have a lot of questions in the Q&A and in the chat. So maybe I'll ask one of the most important questions of this session on lesson learned. What are the key lessons learned from Ukraine crisis on preparedness, on resource mobilization, on first line response? Are they something that we could learn from Ukraine context and you should replicate in other crises? Maybe Emily, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think what was really interesting to look at was that there is, I mean, Irina mentioned it, that kind of the humanitarian principles challenge, but to me also that's a huge strength of the diaspora in some ways, in that when they're fundraising, they're often fundraising to support Ukraine generally. Whereas a lot of organizations, when they receive funding from an institutional donor or something more formal, they're signing a contract which requires it to be used in a certain way. And so diaspora organizations have a lot of flexibility, I think, to work with partners to transfer money to different causes, different areas. They're not bound by these agreements. They don't necessarily have to negotiate them. Of course, there are some challenges that come with that that we should be aware of, but I think that if we can learn from that and leverage it, I think it's an excellent resource, especially for national organizations that as well sometimes have difficulty securing funding early on or are waiting for partnerships. Maybe not the case for Caritas, which is very well positioned, but maybe some smaller national NGOs. I would also say that they're excellent advocacy partners due to that legitimacy, due to that connection with the community, and honestly, often due to linguistic capacity and ability to kind of reach not only partners in the language of their host country, but also in Ukraine, and usually also in English. So I think they're an excellent resource, and that's been a huge lesson, I think, from this.
No, thank you so much, Emily. That's really really insightful. And maybe also I would like to hear Irina's perspective on this lesson learned, or anything we can take on from this context that could be so useful for other crises or contexts.
Thanks so much. First of all, I fully agree with all the points mentioned by Emily. I think we discussed today that we can get a lot of value from working with diaspora organizations, but also the main the main learning point for me today is that we can learn a lot from each other. We can learn a lot from each other, and we all have different skills that we can build on and we can capitalize on if we start working together a little bit more, and if we try to experiment with different types of partnerships. Right, so while humanitarian organizations and more institutional actors need to acknowledge that diaspora organization could be very effective in some types of response, could be agile, could be fast, could, you know, be able to fundraise quickly and other types of intervention. It is important to also build capacity and invest in understanding each other, and basically be patient sometimes for diaspora organizations when we ask for instruments like 5W or some other more traditional ways of working, because by working together, by learning about each other and trying to adopt our approaches, we can also capitalize on our joint resources. So yes, I feel that we can learn a lot from each other, and of course, for this dialogue to happen, we need spaces like DEMAC, who could bring us together and who could allow opportunities to share our experiences, our practices, and of course, work together jointly on providing the best response for the people of Ukraine.
Thank you, Irina. A lot of very, very good points, and maybe also Tetiana would like to complement on that.
Sure. I would just, I also agree with the points that were made. I would just point out, you know, what I think one of the things that we're seeing is this kind of beauty of cooperation between different types of actors in this particular crisis. And that's something I think that we can carry into, you know, as the lessons learned, yeah, that we're seeing, you know, local actors, we're seeing local governments, we're seeing the national government, we're seeing the UN, we're seeing civil society inside of Ukraine, and I would call the diaspora civil society outside of Ukraine. Yeah, and it's this beautiful, it's what's been interesting for me is that it's not one, not a single one of them has taken the top lead. yeah, that it's all happening definitely in cooperation. And I think that's really something interesting to observe. Yeah, and I think it's what makes the reaction the way that it has been. Yeah, and I think we need to build on that. Yeah, so to keep those pieces in mind.
No, absolutely, and I think again a very, very good point on the cooperation that is really unique in Ukraine, and with all these various stakeholders, which is maybe a bit unusual for humanitarian response, and something that brings a lot of value and need to be built upon for a more systematic engagement with civil society actors and diaspora. Thank you, Tatiana. Andre, Dina, you would like to add on this, on the lesson learned?
Yeah, I think one of the very, very good point was a big unity, which was based on a big trust to all the partners or to individuals who came to the market. It looked like we were like, I don't know, thousands of separate ends which started working on something, and then these communication bridges were built very, very fast, and we could work as one mechanism in a strong army of supporters of Ukraine. And I think this was due to their daily communication, which has been established, weekly communications, a lot of meetings, and I think it helps a lot also online interaction, right? So second one, it's the role which we have been kind of prepared. I think the situation itself prepared us to the course of action. I think last 2 months before the war were like quite critical, and I think diaspora understood it very fast and ring the bells and start doing something a bit in advance to get prepared, even though everyone hopes that nothing will happen. And I think as we have a slogan in Bava, Ukraine, it's stronger together. And it's really show how when we work together, how stronger we can be. And I think it's something which we can bring back, and then go through it and show as a case how diaspora and all players could be strong, and also sharing the experience and sharing the knowledge in between each other very, very fast and efficient. It also helped a lot.
Great. Thank you, Andre. And maybe Dina, you want to also complement on that?
Yeah, I would add like 2 points. First is that the scale of the operation and the scale of fundraising activities actually was huge among diaspora organizations. And as the real-time review showed, in the first couple of weeks, diaspora was managed to fundraise about $60 million US dollars to support Ukraine, and it's actually huge. And the issue they have with networks and the easiness they work with Facebook and their capacity to crowdfunding, like among Ukrainians abroad, it's like huge. And it leads to the second point, is that the diaspora organization and their participation in humanitarian response have been or was underestimated, like in this conflict or in all previous contacts before, because they are not like institutionalized maybe, but they have huge capacity. And those who are institutionalized, they have huge networks in all the countries, like in the countries of residence, in neighboring countries, and also countries of their origin. So I think like this underestimation of diaspora organizations should maybe be changed, maybe by what DEMAC is doing, but I think it's very important that they would be a very important part of the humanitarian response, not only in Ukraine, let's say. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much, Dina. Again, some extremely good points. So we are reaching the end of our session, but I think we want to take another maybe 5-10 minutes, if that's okay, just to reply to the question in the Q&A. So if we can bear with us for another 5-10 minutes, we'll go through a few of your key questions. We have one interesting one from Lucia on the neighboring countries. I don't know if maybe Dina and Andre or Emily, you've been looking into this, but was there a connection or partnership between Ukrainian diaspora and the local or national actors in the neighboring country, like in Romania, in Poland, and what were the kind of experience on that? I don't know if
I can start maybe. Yeah. So it definitely was the case, because many diaspora organizations, especially in Poland, Romania, and Hungary, they're coordinating with local NGOs. Because, for example, they are organizing, at the moment, for example, they're organizing summer camps for Ukrainian children abroad, or also they organize psychological support, for example. So in cooperation with local NGOs, they also work with international NGOs in the country, in neighboring countries. For example, there's in Hungary, there's international NGOs, but based in Hungary, it's called Interchurch, Hungarian Interchurch Aid. And they're operating both in Hungary and in Ukraine as an institutional actor and participate in the cluster. So they work with diaspora organizations and local NGOs in Hungary and Ukraine. And also many of them are coordinating with Red Cross represented in neighboring countries, and with businesses in different countries. Like we have this case with Airbnb and others. So they're working not only with Ukrainian, but also other stakeholders in different countries than Ukraine. And maybe Tatiana could also shed their experience, because I guess they work with Poland a lot.
Mm-hmm. And also maybe, I don't know if Andre, and before I give the floor to Tatiana, if Andre and Emily, you have also any experience to share to complement what Dina said?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We coordinate a lot with the Polish diaspora, making even projects together, sending humanitarian aid together, because a lot of the loads went through Poland, but also Poland was a market where you can buy the stuff and send to Ukraine with a less transportation cost. So that was a big impact.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add that I think in many cases operating in the host country where the diaspora organization is, with the refugee population is a very natural fit for a lot of diaspora organizations, because a lot of what they're doing in general anyway before the crisis was information provision, cultural kind of engagement, and that sort of thing. So we did see a lot of, especially in Poland, but also we saw in France and Turkey, in Greece, diaspora organizations acting as kind of reception providers for refugees and providing information. Like in Poland specifically, our Choice Foundation set up a huge information provision system so that people could basically be referred to various services for registration or for psychosocial support, or to get basic needs assistance, etc. So yeah, that was definitely not necessarily part of the scope of this review as much, but definitely came out.
Thank you, Emily. And what about you, Tatiana? Have you had any experience on that?
Yeah, so I would just confirm what Dina was saying before, which was, we also saw a lot of diaspora coming into Poland. Actually, coming into Poland, I know that people actually traveled into Poland because they wanted to come close, and they felt the need to do something. And I know that the Ukrainian, I believe the World Congress of Ukrainians, they actually set up their operations in Przemysl and Peremysl, in the eastern part of Poland, and they were coordinating huge logistics transfers into the country. It was pretty impressive. So
Yeah, no, thank you for now. And actually, there's a few very specific questions for you, Tatiana. So maybe while you're here, I'll just ask them very quickly. Has Caritas been collaborating with Ukrainian diaspora in Italy? That's very specific. I guess there's a interest on the.
Yeah.
Have you been? Yes. Okay.
Yes. So it's been mostly through the church organizations. So there's a Caritas in the Greek Catholic Church, also in Italy, and so they were doing a lot of the work. But again, a lot of that work was going decentralized, so it wasn't coming through us as a national center. It was going straight to the local centers, and then they were taking care of distribution.
Okay, very well. And another very specific question for you from Yuri. How does Caritas Ukraine manage the community relations with local branches, with your local branches?
Yeah. So we have, again, we have a very decentralized system where we form a network together. And everybody has, there's a tight network between, so the national office and then the eparchial offices, and then the eparchial offices between the parish offices, and then kind of roll it all up together. So what the ways that we've worked together, and for the most part, is when we have large projects, national level, we'll be working directly with each of them. But we also have worked on capacity building initiatives over many years. Yeah, where we do trainings both in specialty fields, for example, for psychologists, for psychosocial support. We'll do trainings for the directors on management approaches. We do trainings about humanitarian principles, or so we have this capacity building connection as well with the local centers. It's a good way of working.
Great, thank you so much. And Emily, we have a few specific questions, especially for you, is regarding the recent research. You've been leading the real-time review. How did you identify Ukrainian diaspora organization? How did you deal with the language? Because I guess a lot of them are in different countries. And how did you engage with them?
Yeah, sure. So for how we mapped them, so just for a methodology of the real-time review, the first step was the mapping. So we had some existing information from DEMAC, and then we're able to kind of go online, snowball, basically look through social media, find as many as we could, write them all out, and then go and try to dig deeper and find out information about them, about when they've been founded, what their structure are, what activities they're doing, kind of how their fundraising works, and determine which ones met our criteria for inclusion or not. And as I mentioned, like in this crisis, it was a bit more challenging because, of course, we have so many spontaneous kind of organizations or initiatives between diaspora developing. So we had to sift through that. And then for the real-time review, we then picked the 20 that we felt were kind of the most developed or strong, or had the best kind of presence to kind of be maybe more representative of what was going to go on, and then dug deep into those. And so we actually had language capacity in English, French, Italian, and Ukrainian to try to capture different organizations in different locations. And so that's kind of how we went about it. And so that was done through surveys, but also through key informant interviews, as well as social media monitoring for 6 weeks of all those accounts.
Thank you so much, Emily, for this clarification on your research. That's really useful. There's a couple of small questions we haven't answered on the chat, but I think we'll reach out to you bilaterally on that, because some of them are a little bit beyond the topic of today. So if that's okay, because we're already 10 minutes ahead, I'll just wrap up with a few closing remarks. So I think we do see that the Ukraine crisis and the involvement of Ukrainian diaspora organization in this context is very unique. Because of the scales of the fundraising that has been done, because of the capacity of diaspora organization to mobilize extremely rapidly and to deliver humanitarian assistance in all regions of Ukraine, to develop this very innovative and strong connection with national Ukrainian NGOs, with local authorities, with embassies, and also with international humanitarian actors engaging with the cluster, thanks to also some platform like DEMAC. And I think this is something we really need to learn from and build upon. As Tatiana said, the beauty of cooperation and collaboration is really represented in this crisis. We see so many actors. We see civil society extremely active. We see the private sector. We see diaspora organization, and there is a need maybe to think about a system that can be a little bit more inclusive and make a space for diaspora organization and civil society at large. Also, this is something that DEMAC is advocating for, and we will keep do that. We hope our voice will be heard. I think there's so many interesting points that were mentioned today that we would have loved to develop further. Maybe one of the key ones also raised by Tatiana and Emily on the fact that the crisis is evolving right now. We are moving toward a more protracted crisis, and that the role of diaspora will need to be maybe also adjusted and looking into more sustainable support and linking it with maybe capacity building from key actors in Ukraine and outside. So that could also maybe be a next topic for our next webinar, or something we would be happy to engage with you again in the future. I would like to thank again all the 5 panelists. Thank you so much for this amazing inputs and feedback you've been provided. It's been amazing. I really enjoyed this session, and I hope you did as well. Thank you all very much, and thanks for all the participants as well for joining us today. I hope you had an interesting and insightful moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.